to Themes and Memes. I'm your host, Aaron, and here with me is my co-host, Adam. How are you doing today, Adam?
Yeah, good, Aaron. Good to be back. First of all, I'd like to apologize to the listeners that we weren't able to put out an episode last month, but I've just been really busy, and so we're going to do something a bit more special, though, this month, aren't we? We've got our good friend Tom Secker on.
Yes, he's here to help us review together the new series. Was it season 10 or
season
something
10
of the X-Files? So yeah, I guess without further ado, let's introduce Tom Secker of SpyCulture.com. How you doing?
I'm good, Aaron, and Adam.
We made it on. You made it on.
Yeah,
just about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge to actually getting here to the point where we can actually record this. We've had all kinds of logistical issues, and we've had technical problems this morning, but we're finally here now, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
I guess just to introduce the whole thing, as people who listen to the show may be aware, the classic sort of conspiracy serial, The X-Files from the 1990s, which originally ran between 1993 and I think it was 2002. Is that correct, Tom?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that, yeah. Has been rebooted. So we're looking at over 20 years since the first show was rebooted. We're now looking at a 10th season where the characters of Mulder and Scully are introduced again. And we find that since the last episode of the last show, and I think they had a couple of movies in there as well, both Mulder and Scully have sort of the X-Files had been previously closed down. They'd kind of lost a bit of faith in what they were doing, and had become, I suppose, had sort of just gone about their own lives. But they reunited again for the first episode of the series, where I think is it Scully or Mulder comes into contact with a kind of patriot, like internet caster guy, sort of like a sort of conspiracy right-wing pundit.
You're talking about the Tad O'Malley character? Yeah,
Tad O'Malley. So he's I suppose a little bit like Bill O'Reilly and Alex Jones. I don't know, something like that. Yeah. And he's on the internet doing these big, hyped up, sensationalist, dramatic videos about the takeover of the US, and the clock is ticking, blah 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 blah. Again, very much like Alex Jones, a lot of emotion, a lot of hype. And to cut a long story short, they get pulled back into the X-Files by events conspiring around them through coming into contact with this guy Tad O'Malley, who's got a big conspiracy theory going on about the use of suppressed alien technology by the U.S. government. And they're introduced to a young girl who claims to be an abductee. And so they've sort of fallen out of favor with the FBI and have become pretty disillusioned with the whole notion of conspiracy theories, and are then immediately, very, very quickly pulled back into it all. And things kind of progress from there towards the end of the first episode, which is called My Struggle, whereby Mulder basically comes to the conclusion that he has been lied to and deceived for basically his whole career in the X-Files. He'd been, in the first series, or the first run of them, chasing all of these UFO and paranormal events and investigating them on the premise that there was some kind of grand conspiracy involving aliens. But he eventually discovers and deducts that what's actually happening is that, yes, there was, in fact, a crashed UFO at Roswell back in the late 1940s. But what happened was that the U.S. government basically took that technology, reverse engineered it, and are now using it covertly as a means to basically control, subdue, and actually modify the human population through these, sort of high-tech genetics and other technologies they've got. So, the whole tone of the previous show being focused on a kind of an alien conspiracy is almost turned on its head in a way, when Mulder says that actually what we're looking at here is a conspiracy of men. and that the whole UFO culture, the whole UFO cover-up sort of area of conspiracy theories is essentially like a cover to divert people's attention away from the fact that it's actually human beings doing this. And in this in this big revelation that Mulder has, we presented essentially with the whole big picture. And he sort of frantically lists off this
huge overarching global conspiracy, involving everything from drones, surveillance, 9/11, false flags, martial law, gun grabs, takeover of America, weather manipulation, military-industrial complex, FEMA camps, big pharma, bank crashes, depopulation, eugenics, the whole thing. So it's we really are bombarded in the first episode with all of these very, very well-known and popular references from conspiracy culture, aren't we, Tom?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole first episode, like the dialogue is just laced with this stuff. Even little phrases, like there's a moment where Mulder is going off on one at Skinner, his FBI boss or whatever, and he uses the phrase controlling the past to control the future, obviously from Orwell's 1984. And this is like a slogan for the whole conspiracy culture, if you like. This is one of those things that just keeps getting used over and over. And they've just lifted this stuff wholesale, it seems, and packaged it into this show, at least in the first episode. I mean, less so in the rest of the series, at least maybe until the final episode again. But, yeah, in this first one, it's like a massive dangling piece of bait for every sort of conspiracy theorist out there, you could say. Or at least that's how I felt about it. That's how I responded to it. I get that people have quite different interpretations of why this material is in there and how it's being used, deployed, or whatever. But that was my initial reaction. Like, this is some form of bait.
Yeah.
Well,
I was just going to say, I noticed that from your article that I read, Tom, on spyculture.com, because that was my first introduction to the show, was reading the article on your website, because you did a whole series on the whole series on your website. And I was going to leave my viewership of the X-Files at that. I was like, I bet this, what Tom's saying is it's pandering completely to conspiracy theorists. That sounds correct. But then we decided to do this show. I'm like, let's give this a shot. Let's watch it. And lo and behold, it seems to be true. Pandering to conspiracy theorists.
That was absolutely my first impression. I kind of guessed that would be that would probably be my conclusion after watching it. But I mean, if you look at all these topics and references that are made and are really, really crammed into that first episode, it appears to me as if it's like if you take the whole of conspiracy culture that's out there on the internet and you turn it into a bell curve. This show would be right in the middle of the bell curve. You know what I mean? It's tried to grab a little piece of everything, more attention focused on the more popular parts, less attention focused on the less popular parts.
There is one thing missing, and that's the flat Earth. But apart from that, apart from that, they did get in pretty much everything else you can think of. Yeah.
That's funny. That's the exact same thing that the real life Tad O'Malley's do. So I mean, they go hand in hand.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I think that they've again done quite deliberately here in order to, I guess, make the show more palatable, is with this whole conspiracy theory that is established in the first episode, whereby it's explained that what's happening here is actually being done by humans, and they use the phrase conspiracy of men over and over again, rather than aliens. This really ties into, again, the kind of middle of the bell curve in terms of UFO and sort of alien conspiracy culture on the internet. That is essentially what you might call one of the more palatable, one of the more plausible sort of, theories out there in relation to this material. If you look at things like the Disclosure Project, Stephen Greer, this guy who's been soliciting information from, government employees regarding the UFO phenomenon, the popular narrative, the one that's presented as being, the presented at least as being the most plausible, is that actually what we're seeing in the skies, all of these UFO sightings, is actually, you know, reverse engineered technology. It's actually secret military technology rather than aliens. So, you know, rather than go off into space looking for extraterrestrials, they are, turning it back around and just tying it back into that whole notion of this being, something a little bit more grounded. I mean, no less fantastic, but I think that they've done this, again, to perhaps try and make it a little bit more sophisticated, if you will, rather than just focusing on the alien aspect.
I'm with you as far as that goes. Yeah, I mean, but the question I'm now asking is that, I mean, I was looking at it from the other perspective when I wrote the first article on this series, and I said, if anything, what the show is doing is encouraging people who might have a kind of outward interest in the paranormal or in UFOs specifically, which is, I would say, more people than have an interest in geopolitical conspiracy or whatnot. And it's introducing them to the whole kind of hard conspiracy, the geopolitical, the conspiracy of men, that it's more likely to encourage them to take that subject seriously than it is to put conspiracy theorists off by mixing in the UFO stuff. On balance, that would be my guess. I mean, how would one even go about measuring that? But it does beg this question. Why is it, not that I have an answer or expect either of you to have an answer, but why is it that aliens are considered by the, if you like, mainstream conspiracy media, why is it that aliens are considered to be so ridiculous? I mean, given some of the stuff that they do cover, which I'm sure we would disagree about what we find is plausible and implausible, and that's fine. But, you know, they cover some pretty implausible stuff. I'm sure we all agree on that. But yet that's something that most of them will distance themselves from. And if they do talk about it, like you say, Adam, they'll talk about it as a military conspiracy, a Pentagon thing or whatever. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just...
No, that's a difficult one. I mean, I do totally understand what you're saying there. It's weird because I often ask that question myself. You know, I don't subscribe to any particular theory. I think a lot of it's nonsense. But I'm open-minded enough to admit that, you know, I don't know what I don't know. But having said that, I did always find it, I always found it odd that the mainstream media had this default position in regard to the whole concept of UFOs. And I think this probably goes back to the sort of, I guess, the beginning of the whole UFO culture, you know, that started in sort of like, you know, mid-20th century, and how, you know, this was outlandish at the time, and there were a number of government projects that were designed to investigate these things that were, you know, they were sort of they were whitewashes essentially. But I think a lot of the ridicule comes from a sort of a cultural set of standards that were established back then. And, you know, this stuff was investigated. We found nothing. Anyone who actually believes this is still going on must be crazy. It's all swamp gas and the planet Venus and shooting stars and all that type of stuff. So it is odd, but you know, they play right into that in this show. You know, it's once again it's presenting the sort of the mainstream consensus on any given topic as being, you know, totally ridiculous. So.
Yeah. I don't know if this is right to say, but the alien conspiracy is like the older conspiracy, or all the stuff on aliens has been around and established as kind of like wacky fringe stuff, and everybody knows about it. But the human conspiracy of men, or whatever it is newer, and it's a thing that's popped on the scene in the post 9/11 world, and it's really picked up a lot of steam. And we're at a point where all people are aware of it, and now it's like really going over the edge, and you can see it in the X-Files here, is that the X-Files is covering it and saying, hey, this is the new wacky idea that's not so wacky, because you're starting to believe this, right?
Yeah, it's like, okay, this is fair game now. We've society's reached the point where we'll accept this, so we're going to go ahead and do it because you'll buy it. So.
Well, and I mean, on that subject of kind of which came first, I mean, the notion of a conspiracy of men has been around for thousands of years. But this particular sort of conspiracy that you're talking about, that is something that's very much a kind of post-Cold War phenomenon, I would say, in terms of like mass mainstream kind of appreciation of this sort of stuff. In terms of like the conspiracy culture itself, I would say actually originated in ufology in the post-World War II period. That's actually,
Yeah,
I mean,
would
before
agree.
JFK, before, MLK, before any of that, MK Ultra, all of that other stuff, we had, Roswell.
Well,
Yeah.
I think this is where it stems from, and I've kind of talked about this in some previous point, but I remember thinking about this, and I tend to feel that the Roswell thing sort of started it, I suppose. It was, it established the high idea of some kind of a cover-up that was quite large and, large in scale and in importance. And then you had the whole JFK thing, and it seems to me that these two issues are almost like the two cornerstones of the conspiracy culture. JFK and Roswell. I mean, they kind of what started it. And as you say, it wasn't really until after the Cold War, sort of, I guess, somewhere in the 90s in America, where it became more about, the conspiracy of men. People started picking up on geopolitical issues, and the two kind of melded together.
Technically speaking, Roswell was first, so the alien conspiracy was first. And lo and behold, this first episode of the new season of The X-Files basically starts with going back to Roswell, right? So it's referencing that then. That's what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And
sure, it has this amazing reconstruction of Roswell. Yeah. The best reconstruction of Roswell we've ever seen, in fact.
Yeah.
Assuming, a lot of stuff, but you know what I mean? It's the most visually compelling version of that event that we've ever seen. I mean, in that sense.
Yes.
Yeah, I personally like how the UFO was made out of rebar and, like, concrete. That was nice.
Yeah.
But
I think they do actually mention JFK in that episode as well. I think it's a very, very brief reference. Or I think, is it Mulder having some kind of flashback to him spending time with his son, firing off a rocket, and he sort of
he quotes
JFK's speech. Yeah,
I can't remember what the exact quote is, but he quotes him.
It's we choose to go to the moon. That one,
Yeah, exactly. Not because these things are easy, but because they're hard. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So it's kind of harkening back to that. I guess that kind of patriotic nostalgia, isn't it? In a way, the whole the myth and the legend of JFK and what he stood for, and images of the Constitution spring to mind. So it's very much along those lines. But I mean, did you guys have any other sort of notes that you wanted to make just on the first episode before we move on?
I just say quickly, it's serious, and then the series gets kind of goofy. I'd like to hear what Tom has to say about that. What do you think?
Well, sure. I mean, should we move on to the next couple of episodes?
Well, yeah, we can revisit, little bits and pieces as we go. And once we've covered the episodes, we can also talk about any other further notes that may tie in. So we'll move on here. So the next one, part 2, episode 2 is called Founder's Mutation, and it's essentially, Mulder and Scully get pulled into investigating a strange suicide at a biotech corporation that happens to be called Nugenics, which I found pretty funny.
That's right.
And this employee has heard ringing in his ears, and then has proceeded to go and stab himself in the head with a letter opener. So it's typical X-Files stuff. Again, very much like CSI or Fringe or one of those other shows. What we find in these episodes is that the plot is generally carried through on some kind of murder investigation or death investigation of paranormal implications. But so it's this company called Nugenics. They uncover that Nugenics is tied to the Department of Defense. They have projects there, and is also funding a bunch of local hospitals in Washington. And it essentially transpires throughout the episode that what this company is doing is either modifying unborn babies before they're born, and or genetically altering them once they have been born. So they've got a whole sort of system going on where they're taking young mothers off the street, mothers who've had, the husband leave them, they're poor, they've got nowhere to go, and using them by, giving them shelter and then taking the babies. So you've got that whole reference to, I guess, sort of a forced eugenics program there. And they're experimenting with everything from extrasensory perception to like telekinesis and the show progresses eventually to the point. Where does it go actually? So maybe you can help me jog my memory here, Tom, because they come to realize that Mulder and Scully's child, who they put up for adoption to protect him, may have been involved in this. Is that correct? Part of this? Yeah.
That's essentially where they go with it. And I always found, I've got to be honest, I found this second episode made hardly any impact on me whatsoever.
No.
The whole thing just seemed to be like a massive letdown compared to the first episode, which was so enticing and, like I say, so full of like bait and things to grab your attention at the very least. Whereas this one, like you say, they find that this company and they're doing the genetic experiments, and then Scully has this realization that, oh, maybe William was somehow tied up in all of this, and were we right to give him up or not? And this is a recurring storyline throughout the whole 6 episodes. Scully's given up her baby, her kind of guilt over this, or trying to figure out whether she feels guilty or not. And I'm honestly not sure where they're going with that and why they included it, beyond the obvious, just some emotional drama to kind of, keep the thing ticking over. Because it doesn't add up to anything in the end. Is this just one of those things they've left as an open-ended thing so they can pick it up if they get another series, maybe? I'm not sure.
Possibly.
Yeah.
It seems like that could be the case.
Yeah, definitely. And like you're saying, Tom, it's forgettable because like I said before, I remembered the series just becoming goofy, but before it even does, it has this episode, which is just plain kind of disposable. Even it's like, that's how much I forgot this one. And then it turns goofy. But like before that, you get something that's kind of about eugenics, kind of about alien-human hybrids and Scully's baby. And do you remember the old X-Files series and movie where we think we remember that Scully had an alien baby? But I know that I can't remember what happened. I liked the show. I can't even remember what happened then, but we're expected to remember that,
I think that was the reaction of quite a lot of X-Files fans was, oh yeah, Scully had a baby, didn't she? I'd completely forgotten about. I thought it was all about I remember a lot of UFOs, but I don't remember any baby. And this is like from like quite hardcore fans, like comments that I've got on my articles and things. Was like, this is what they were saying was, oh yeah, we sort of vaguely remember that, but it never went anywhere, and now they've picked it up again for no obvious reason. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery as to why that whole theme is in there. And I honestly don't have an awful lot kind of to add to that.
I mean, I think if nothing else, it's certainly drama to hook you in. It's the emotional bait. Obviously, throughout the first series and somewhat in this season, they playing on the relationship between Mulder and Scully, the fact that they were at odds with one another when they first teamed up. They eventually sort of warmed to one another and had something of a relationship. I think that were they married? I'm not sure, but of course they had the child, and then this is I guess standard stuff that they put in any kind of media or drama, at least to just hook you in. And so if we're looking at this this whole issue of the baby that was put up for adoption and all the focus on that, I think we could simply explain that away as being just the emotional bait to give it a bit of, I don't know, oomph.
Yeah.
The byproduct of it
doesn't
being
really work,
the drama and the two main characters having a relationship and all that. Yeah, just standard stuff, I think.
Yeah, standard stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're right in saying that this particular one is particularly disposable, because I'm looking at my notes here and I'm trying to think back, and I'm blank. And I can't for the life of me remember how the sequence of events unfolds and what the ultimate sort of conclusions towards the end of the episode are. They uncover essentially the structure of what's happening. So again, biotech corporation under DoD influence or contract, funding hospitals through foundations to get women in there so they can steal their babies and use them for genetic research. And it's revealed that Mulder and Scully's baby may have been involved in that somehow. I don't know where it goes from there. I can't.
Goes to the next episode.
So let's jump into the next one then, because this is one where me and Adam had some quite different responses, I think, to this third episode. So it might be fun to get into that.
I have to say that I think I was when I first saw the first 3 episodes, and this is going back probably a month now, maybe more. I did have a pretty harsh reaction. So I was feeling, I don't know, a little bit pissed off about the silliness of it all.
Yeah.
And so I guess I could have been a little too harsh on it. I just thought, again, the way that they tried to cram so much in, with the, sort of carried through on these very stiff performances. But still, number 3. After watching it again, I can see the funny side in it. It's called Mulder and Scully Meet the Were-Monster. It starts out essentially with Mulder having something of a crisis of faith. He's talking about the whole history of the X-Files and his personal journey, and how he feels that this has all really been a waste of time because he ends up chasing these, paranormal happenings and just running around in circles, and he's just having a bit of a crisis. And he, again, in this kind of monologue or discussion, he explains that so many of these sort of so-called monster events, like werewolves and that kind of thing, turn out to be hoaxes, which eventually explained by some other explanation. But no sooner has he said this that he gets pulled into the next one. Scully comes and said, "Well, we've got another monster case." Yep. And there's been a few murders in some town somewhere that seem to have been done by some kind of large rabid animal, and they go to investigate and eventually discover that there is some kind of a, well, they call it a were-monster. Was it? The were-monster, but it's this guy's kind of a lizard man, which I found very interesting, played by actually a New Zealand comedian called Rhys Darby. And that's kind of why one of the reasons that I just had to laugh at this and I couldn't take it seriously, because I'm so used to seeing Rhys Darby in like Flight of the Conchords, rather than a were-monster. And it's just that New Zealand accent sometimes can be a little bit hard to take seriously. But so I mean, again, this is another weird one. I would say this is almost disposable again, because they eventually track down this were-monster, and Mulder has a sort of a bit of a confrontation with him, and he actually explains that he's not actually a man that turns into a monster, but a monster that turns into a man, and that when he's in human form, that's when he's freaking out. That's his activation, And they eventually realize that the murders that had been happening around this place were not actually perpetrated by this monster, that he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, I mean, where this all goes and what the relevance is, again, I don't know. It's all a bit blank in terms of the wider plot arc, but there are a few little interesting, things that pop up. Again, I think the fact that it's the lizard man thing, it just really reminded me of like the whole David Icke stuff, with all the reptilians.
Yeah.
Well, he's a shape-shifting reptilian. So, I mean, what did you have to, say about that, Tom? What were your thoughts on this?
Well, I thought, again, the whole thing is not exactly a kind of bait, but a sort of psychological reassurance, maybe, for conspiracy theorists. Because, like you say, Mulder starts off, he's suffering from ennui. He sat there going, there's the wonderful line about the hairy What's-it of Walla Walla, which just makes me laugh. Such a wonderful, National Enquirer type headline. And just saying, he's sort of wondering whether it's time to put away these childish things and, grow up and live an adult life as he sees it. And then, of course, he gets pulled right back into it. And by the end, he's had the most profound affirmation that everything he's working on is actually worth working on and is actually looking at a real phenomenon and real things, because he's come not only face to face with this guy, he's shook hands with him. They have that moment at the end in the sort of car's headlights out in the woods, and he actually has a full-on conversation and sees the guy transform in front of him. So it's, like I say, it's a sort of affirmation that, okay, if you're doing the hard thing and trailing the conspiracy road, which a lot of conspiracy theorists like to think they are, you'll have these moments where you lose your faith and you think it's not really worth it, and maybe I never really had the evidence I thought I had. but it's okay because sooner or later you'll get to shake hands with a transforming lizard man. That even your most outlandish fantasies will be affirmed and shown to you to be true. But I think the most crucial thing there is that all of this is happening out in the woods. No one else gets to see it. Mulder gets the proof before his own eyes, but it's nothing he can take to anyone else and prove to them. So it reaffirms that whole mindset without actually giving you anything to do anything with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, just on that point, it's interesting that prior to actually meeting the were-monster, Mulder has a previous confrontation trying to catch him, and he's got his phone camera out, and he snaps a few pictures in this kind of scuffle they have, and he's convinced himself that I must have got a picture here, and he had every opportunity to get a good close-up of this were-monster with his phone, but when we actually see the photos and the way they've come out, they're sort of this typically blurry, indistinct, ambiguous images that you would expect when you're looking at so-called photos of the so-called paranormal. So again, that kind of ties into that whole notion of the evidence, the final confirmation and proof, having it was so close to being obtained, but not quite. And Mulder does get his own personal confirmation through a direct experience, but again, circumstances prevent him from actually getting any solid evidence to take away from that, which I think is very interesting. And again, it ties back into that whole concept of if we look at the average conspiracy theorists kind of journey through all of this stuff and the doubts and ever being able to obtain any evidence, having opportunities to do so, but those opportunities never coming to fruition, but then ultimately having some kind of direct personal experience which restores their faith. So I think that was very relevant.
It's definitely a goof on the paranormal in particular, but conspiracy at the same time, because anytime there's a Bigfoot video or whatever, it's a guy in a suit. And this episode shows you clearly a guy in a dumb suit, right? And so it's showing you that, the Bigfoot thing, whatever, all those monsters. It's a guy in a suit or a rubber ducky float thing for Loch Ness Monster or whatever. And the whole time the actors are like, they're goofing around. And the final takes for this episode were like what you'd almost expect out of outtakes, where they're like laughing on camera and stuff nearly. So the whole thing was like tongue in cheek, and they're like goofing on the silliness of the paranormal, etc. But then at the end, like Tom says, it totally reaffirms it for people who are, true believers or whatever, and said, everybody thinks it's silly, and this whole episode is basically showing you it's silly, but you're still right. It's okay.
Well, I think the whole episode can be summed up in one moment, which is when they're running around the car park chasing the were-monster, and Scully turns to Mulder and says, "I'd forgotten how fun these cases could be."
Yeah.
That's what the episode is. It's just a little reminder of, you know what, even if you have your doubts and your depressions and your moments of, I can't be bothered anymore, it's still fun.
Yeah.
So enjoy, if nothing else, enjoy the fun of conspiracy.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to get any hard proof anyway, so fuck you.
It's almost like like harkening back to the original series, because the original series was very, very much focused on these, monster events, and so it's almost like a little nostalgic.
It's a satire
to those
parody
fun
of
days.
Itself, is what it is. Yeah.
It's a satire of it's actually very true, and the comedic tones don't only come through in this episode, but there's a number of other ones where, we just see comedy and we see lightheartedness and we see all these little quips being injected throughout the script. And, sometimes I wonder whether this is the actors just not being able to take any of it seriously and just having to vent somehow through the performances or whatever it may be. But, I can't remember enough about the first, the original run to know whether there was any humor in it.
It wasn't like this. It wasn't like this. It's like they're just goofing on themselves.
Yeah, there was a bit of humor. I mean, Mulder was always quite a kind of wry, funny character in that sense, but it was not like this, not as absurd as this, not as kind of openly, guy in a really silly lizard costume kind of joke.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, you look like something out of Power Rangers or whatever.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, that's what. It's funny you should say that, because that's what came to mind. It was something like that, and it's interesting that you say that, Aaron, and that when we're looking at these, these real life, real world reports of things like werewolves and Bigfoot and blah, 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 it is somebody in a ridiculous rubber suit or something. And when we look at this were monster in the show, I mean, I think they probably could have gone to more effort to make it look, I guess, more realistic, but they didn't. It was so obviously a suit. I mean, it wasn't the least bit convincing. And so it kind of was self-satire in a way, wasn't it?
Well, and I guess a bit of a throwback to like old Godzilla movies and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, monsters. Yeah. Just the monster episode in general. This is the monster episode, and we're going to parody it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I guess that's enough to say on that particular episode. I mean, again, we realize that this is a monster. I mean, we don't know where he's come from, but, he's a monster that turns into a man rather than the other way around. He wasn't actually responsible for the crimes. He then goes, says goodbye to Mulder to go and hibernate for 10,000 years, supposedly. And we're kind of left there, aren't we?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I can move on. I mean, I guess just quickly, the one little thing that I noticed, and this is, there's a few of these in the show, and it does make me wonder when we've got what appear to be these little sort of Masonic jokes going on, because the lizard man, he's chosen a name for himself called Guy Man. It just made me think of the letters GM or Grandmaster. You've got the reptile lizard man, which is, I mean, we could talk about that for ages, but I don't know if there's anything to this, but when I see something like that attached to a sort of lizard man reference or David Icke reference, which I think a lot of this stuff is almost like Masonic jokery or something. It does make me wonder whether these names have been chosen for a reason. I mean, it could have been completely arbitrary, but yeah, I just thought I'd mention that quickly.
Well, I think that actually sets up the next episode quite nicely, to be honest, given what happens in, I think it's the next one. I've forgotten the order of episodes. Carry on, Adam, please.
Well, the next one, I mean, if you think things are weird at this point, just wait until you get into the next one here, because the next one is, the title is called Home Again, and it starts out with a scene of homeless people in some dingy sort of dirty street alley being cleared away by some kind of government or corporate, cleaning crew who are wanting to, do up the area and take it over and all the rest of it. And so we've got an immediate presentation of themes regarding, the inequity of society, police brutality, homelessness, poverty, these types of themes. And there is a murder, some kind of very, very grisly murder amongst all this. And I guess, Mulder and Scully get pulled into it, and as they investigate the murder, we come to understand, or it's revealed to us at least, that the perpetrator of these murders is actually a painting that comes to life. So it's kind of a bit of street art, where some street artist has sort of painted some vigilante character on the side of the wall, and this vigilante character in the artwork actually comes to life in some way and starts basically taking out what is it? I think is it policemen or people who are trying to, kick these homeless people off the street?
All of the people who are involved in this project to boot out the homeless and gentrify the area.
Yes.
So you have a housing and urban development official, you have a developer, naturally, and you have this, she's like a board of education woman who wants to, who sort of is also involved in this for her own nefarious reasons that she tries to present as nice, pleasant, liberal reasons.
Yeah.
So they all end up getting very pulled to pieces, quite literally, in very, very grisly and satisfying fashion, I have to say. I like this episode.
Yeah, this one's pretty good, actually. The Banksy art comes to life. It's a lot about art too. I mean, we'll get to that here in a second, but I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, it's I found it very, very strange. So I'd be interested to see what you guys had to make of it. I mean, I think the main things that popped out to me were, I guess, just hitting on inequality, the lack of social justice, homelessness, and the whole concept of some kind of, street vigilante trying to tip the scales and bring about some justice by attacking the oppressors, essentially. So it's,
all the ideals of these like socio-political street artists made real and tangible via the magic that exists in the world of X-Files.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
If only it were true.
I called it... Well, exactly, though. But that's what this episode is. It's a bit of revenge fantasy. Because who, apart from a sociopath, would watch that opening sequence of homeless people being, hosed down and kicked off the streets and not think, the people who are doing this kind of deserve at least some kind of retribution for this, and possibly not a grisly murder, but some people would think they deserve a grisly murder. They certainly like watching it on television, and that's the point. It's televised revenge fantasy. So it definitely plays into all of that. And, before we get into the occult dimension of it for real, there is one sequence in this that I think, again, plays into the reaffirmation of conspiracy theories, or conspiracism, at least, the kind of vague, wishy-washy, conspiratorial view of the world. And that's when Mulder has been abandoned by Scully. Scully's got to run off and deal with her dying mother. So Mulder's got to go it alone for a little while. And he wanders out of the building and he comes across the developer and the school board woman bickering in the street. And he starts talking to them. And he figures out rather quickly that both of these people are pretending that they're looking after the homeless and have the homeless interests at heart. But both of them deep down are selfish and corrupt and doing it entirely for self-serving reasons. And this is like a metaphor for seeing through the two-party system. That he sees both of these people presenting different versions of their supposedly benevolent actions, but he quite quickly twigs, no, you're both corrupt and selfish. And once again, I think that's like a little signpost to conspiracy theorists that, you see through the two-party system, you see through these false oppositions or whatever, just like Mulder does. You're one of the smart ones. So even in an episode like this, which is like a horror fantasy episode, there's still a bit of that in it. And it is like political. These people are political officials of some sort. So it's a little kind of microcosm, I guess, of that much bigger political problem. That is a very real political problem, don't get me wrong. But again, a little affirmation for conspiracy theorists.
Definitely. And that's one of the running themes throughout the series, as you've pointed out, and as I agree with for sure. And we'll see more of this to come.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very interesting observation. To be honest, I didn't pick up on that at the time, but now that you mention it, it does make complete sense. And that, we've got this identifiable, relatable problem, and these political officials coming in saying, "Oh, well, we've got the answer." No, I've got the answer, and they're bickering amongst themselves, and they're both just two sides of the same coin, who are essentially perpetrators and enablers of the problem itself. And with Mulder coming in as a third party, seeing through this all. So that is quite interesting.
Yeah, and
go on.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, with like the art side of it, and the street art and the ideals of street artists, kind of echo that same sort of sentiment of the conspiracy theorists. You're looking for social justice. You're looking for a way to change things, and the way to change things is ideally for the street artists through your art. And how does one literally do that? Well, you make an art monster that kills people. But while this show is doing that, they're also telling you in very explicit terms that this is alchemy too. Like, oh yeah, it's about my idea coming to life, man. I just had this idea. The artist is saying this. He's like, I had this idea. I just found that it literally came to life. And then he goes on to explain some alchemical principles, and that's what this is very much about. And so it becomes about, hey, you truthers, conspiracy theorists, that you have this power if you can unlock it. It becomes an occult thing for them as well. Mm-hmm. So it gets pretty complex if you want to break it down there. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, that little the discussion that Mulder and Scully have with the street artist is very much that way, isn't it? I mean, they're talking about the alchemy of ideas and creation, and he talks about how I have created something, but once it takes on its own life, I'm no longer responsible for it, and I'm taking ideas and realizing in a material sense, albeit inadvertently. But so you've got that whole theme of, as you say, the revolutionary sort of anti-establishment narrative, the rhetoric, the sentiment, being materialized and realized in literal form. So that is quite interesting. I mean, again, I hadn't actually, to be honest, I did kind of, I don't know, I sort of just floated through that episode without looking at it in that way. So that is interesting. I mean, I guess I'm trying to think about how this ties into the next one, but there are a few themes. Sorry, I was just going to say there are a few themes toward the end of that one, which do, I guess, press on the idea of inequity and people's propensity to kind of discard and do away with anything that's problematic or ugly in life. And this ties into the sort of arc of Mulder and Scully's baby, the one they put up for adoption. And we have these bits of dialogue where the street artists and the homeless people are talking about how they're treated like trash, how they're just done away with and ignored because they're too ugly, they're too much of a problem for people to deal with, out of sight, out of mind. And so this kind of triggers something of a personal crisis and sort of period of self-questioning for Scully, who feels that she may have treated her son in the same way by putting him for adoption. So there's a big kind of moral quandary, which I guess sort of prompts the audience to question themselves through this whole thing and look at, well, how do we deal with these types of problems? Are we being dismissive and cruel towards homeless people, towards those who are less fortunate than us? So, yeah.
Well, and we should, just to pick up on what you were saying about names from the last episode, we should note, what is Scully's baby called?
William? Yeah.
Will I Am. And in a conversation about Will being made flesh, about ideas being brought to life, she has this lengthy, internal monologue reflection about her baby, Will I Am.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that's an accident. I just can't.
No, I think you're right there. Yeah, absolutely.
Of all the names they could have picked,
Yeah, exactly. It's not Bill, right? They say, "Oh, my son Bill, little Billy."
Yeah.
They said William, the full name.
Yeah. So let's look at how. I mean, are there any threads which connect the end of this one into the next one? Because I can't remember. The next one seems to start off with a completely new premise altogether. But I'm just trying to think about the wider plot arcs here, because once again, when we look at the first episode, we have this big grand conspiracy outlined for us within the first half an hour of the show, and then the plot moves on to these more confined conspiracies. In essence, these sort of specific events and specific aspects of something larger. And at times throughout I suppose, number 2, number 3, and number 4, which we're just looking at here, you do wonder what the connection is. So, I mean, did you guys have anything to say on that? I mean, in terms of how these different sort of, again, confined conspiracies relate into the larger conspiracy arc of this? Because I was personally a little bit confused as to how the continuity was supposed to all fit together.
It's a tricky one. Yeah. I guess only in the sense that you have a story about the poor, the marginalized, the underclass, whatever. So that fits into the notion of an elitist conspiracy against the people. It just keeps that kind of notion kind of bubbling away in the background, so that all really comes home in the 6th episode, not in the 5th at all, really, but very much in the 6th episode. It's just keeping, that kind of mentality and that kind of idea floating around in the background as you're ultimately watching another Monster of the Week episode. It's
kind of...
I was just going to say, just more of standard conspiracy fare, like it gets into the suicide bombing, it's the reality behind that, gets into drug use, oh, that's cool, right? And we're alternative. And, just more general stuff to throw at the truth movement, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned the presentation of, I guess, the oppressed in some way, the marginalized, because we see this absolutely in number 2, because, again, going back to this eugenics conspiracy, what we're presented with is the guy who ends up killing himself because he's been, psychologically tortured by one of these, mutated children, is I think he's an Indian guy, and he's also gay. And there are quite a few references in that episode to I guess kind of like LGBT rights and kind of like anti-racist sentiment. And so he's kind of presented as being, like a sort of a victim minority in that episode. And then once again, we go to episode 3 with the were monster. He's a victim. He's some kind of creature which has been presumably altered or mutated in some way, resulting in his transformations. And then again, number 4, one we've just covered, we're looking at the homeless, so victims. So I absolutely see what you're saying there. We've got the presentation of some kind of oppressed group or individual, some kind of victim, someone who's been marginalized, and that pops up again and again. And I think that carries through into the next one, which is called Babylon, and it opens up with a suicide bombing in Texas. So it shows these 2 Islamic guys saying their prayers and preparing, and they walk into some building, some conference or something, and blow the whole thing up. One of them,
it's an art gallery.
Oh, it's an art gallery, right? Okay, so
pictures of Mohammed, blah blah, all that.
Oh, right. That was the
Yeah.
reason. So again, we're looking back at Charlie Hebdo.
Yep.
We're looking at things like those.
There was a shooting actually.
The Danish
in
cartoons.
Well, that too, but there was also a shooting in Texas at a gallery that was hosting. It was Pamela Geller was hosting a inflammatory art presentation, trying to piss some people off, and managed to piss someone off, and they went there and fired off a few bullets. So it's actually playing on a very real event that happened in Texas like a year before.
Yeah, well, there we go. That's interesting. I don't watch Homeland, Tom, but I know that you do. But from what I know of it, this episode reminded me of Homeland in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah, it's got a touch of Homeland about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so where are we with this? So yeah, these suicide bombers blow this thing up. One of them survives. He is badly injured in a coma in hospital. Mulder and Scully are approached by 2 younger agents, sort of like the earlier versions of themselves in a way. A redhead girl and a kind of gung-ho guy.
Clearly, they're doppelgangers.
So, the
guy's got a similar name, and all of that.
Yeah, Miller. Yeah. And so these are supposedly like the next generation. Perhaps opening up a spin-off. I don't know. But anyway, so they have sort of a couple of arguments about what's going on, and they're working for the government trying to track down this terrorist cell and predict when the next attack's going to be. And Mulder and Scully eventually convince these 2 to try and help them communicate with this sort of vegetated, injured terrorist who's in some kind of a coma or something. And Mulder decides that he decides that arguably the most likely way he's got of communicating with them is going to be through some kind of psychedelic / out of body experience, and then he's going to take magic mushrooms to do so.
Yeah, it doesn't. He just kind of comes up with that idea out of nowhere.
He just comes up.
This sounds good.
Yeah, I was just thinking about. I was just thinking to myself, how does he actually arrive at this conclusion? There's no real forethought there. It's just kind of like, magic mushrooms, obviously, and so he convinces these other guys to help him with that. Mulder has a crazy, mushroom psychedelic experience, and he believes that through this experience he does actually communicate with this guy in some kind of altered reality or something like that. Reminds me a lot, this one, of Fringe, the J.J. Abrams conspiracy show, which is, again, this itself was a spin-off of the original X-Files, and now the X-Files is kind of spinning off that. So it's, again, coming full circle with that whole idea, because that show was really, really pushing the whole, all these MK Ultra themes of, drugs, psychedelics, altered states, remote viewing, communication with the dead.
So that's where Mulder got the idea. J.J. Abrams. He should just said
J.J. Abrams.
Why didn't he say that?
It was like an episode of Fringe. It was literally just an episode of Fringe for all intents and purposes. But that's basically what happens. He, communicates with this terrorist shortly before the terrorist, dies. But beforehand, he manages to get the location of the next bombing, and they call the whatever it is, Department of Homeland Security, who swoop in and stop them, and the day is saved. And the previously skeptical younger agent, at least the woman anyway, Agent Einstein, which is weird. She has her own faith in science tested, because she is very much like Scully when she comes in. She's very critical, very skeptical. She thinks that all the X-Files and all this paranormal stuff is just a load of rubbish. It's a complete waste of time. But towards the end of the episode, she becomes a believer. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for that one. What I might do is I'll just make a couple of notes on things that I picked up on there, and that's that in this episode, I found that they were definitely pushing the mainstream terror narrative, and as much as they were inciting fear and religious profiling of Islam, of Muslims, whilst at the same time pushing this kind of contradictory message of, sort of anti-racism, like multicultural tolerance, that kind of thing. So this to me was very, very reminiscent of the general mainstream sort of tone and narrative when it comes to terrorism, is that yes, this is happening everywhere. Yes, you should be shit scared. And yes, it's all Muslims who are doing it. But at the same time, we can't get into racial profiling. We've got to be tolerant. And, so I found that very interesting. I was questioning as to what kind of message they're trying to push here. Are they just repeating the mainstream message? What do you have to say about this, Tom?
Well, I mean, you did get, some kind of pushback against that sort of all Muslims are terrorists idea. Most of the pushback was pretty soft, to be honest.
It was soft. It was soft.
You certainly have more people in this episode talking about how all Muslims are crazy terrorists than you have anyone strongly opposing that idea. So exactly whether they were trying to just get that across in the kind of blunt way that like Homeland does the same thing, or other shows of that sort of type, or whether they were trying to do reflect that sort of bizarrely contradictory, not really sure where this dialogue is ever going to go way that the way that the mainstream covers that sort of question. I'm not really certain. I'm not sure whether we're supposed to kind of sympathize with the crazy nurse or not, because I certainly get the idea of, if someone's a suicide bomber, why are they keeping him alive? Really, I get where that's coming from. Not that I'm saying you should turn off the life support machine, but there is a degree of sympathy with what she starts saying, at least at the beginning of that scene.
Well,
but then it all gets interrupted by Mulder tripping out and rocking out on mushrooms anyway. So I'm not sure where they're supposed to leave us with that.
Can I just want to quickly interject, and then I'll hand it over to you, Aaron. I guess when I was referring to this kind of contradictory set of messages regarding, the fear, the religious profiling mixed with the promotion of tolerance and multiculturalism, I guess what I was thinking of at the time was that scene that you just outlined there, Tom, where one of the nurses comes in to the bedside of the terrorist, and she starts talking about the damn immigrants coming over here, taking our jobs, and the terrorists, and blah, 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 blah. And so we're immediately, I guess, drawn to not sympathize with her. I mean, she's speaking a sense in some ways, but she's doing it from a place of hatred, obviously, and of bigotry. And so it's weird how that scene plays out, because, again, like you say, we're kind of drawn into sympathizing with some of what she's saying, but the way she's saying it is very, very unpalatable, and it would generally be the kind of thing that most people would go, oh, God, that's bullshit, I'm not listening to it. And then she goes on to expand that this whole issue of mass migration is a United Nations conspiracy to flood America with Islamic terrorists to create terror, to I think something along the lines of perpetuate the terror state or the police state or something like that. And so whilst
she even goes that far, I think she just says the idea is to get them in so there's lots of terrorists here.
Yeah.
Oh, right. There
doesn't even seem to be any logical conclusion to this. No. It just seems to be a
okay. I guess that was my own inference there. But it's strange because, again, it's, to me, that felt like they were ridiculing the idea of long-term strategic immigration policies by making it out to be some kind of very, very simple, cartoonish, conspiracy that most people would go, oh, that's bullshit. So, what do you guys think about that?
I actually just had a really weird idea, if you two will entertain it.
Yeah.
Okay. You've got the truth movement as it stands now has changed radically from what it once was. But you kind of see what it is and what it was in this episode. It used to be a bunch of like a touting of the mushrooms and psychedelic experience and left-leaning sort of ideas. Generally speaking, it's not really right, but you get what I mean. The guy who would take mushrooms and be like, "Yeah, man, I'm communicating with the spiritual world or whatever." And now the same people that used to do that are touting neo-Nazi ideas, and so that's reflected in what the woman's saying. And the whole time you've got the old icon of the conspiracy movement, Mulder, meeting this new doppelganger, the new Mulder and the new Scully. They're meeting the new ones. So you're seeing the old and the new in all sorts of different ways. I don't know if that means anything, but...
I think you're onto something there.
I have no clue.
Well, I mean, for me, the thing that was, aside from the question of the nurse and her opinions and what have you, the one thing they're really affirming in this episode is take mushrooms and save the world.
Yeah.
Even though Mulder doesn't actually take any mushrooms, it turns out that she gives him a placebo and he somehow manages to create this very vivid trip all out of his own head. But whatever.
Well, did she actually, though? Because she says to Skinner that she gave him a placebo. But then
at the end, it's revealed that, or they say that at least.
Well, I did wonder whether or not she's bullshitting there.
I thought she was bullshitting personally. I thought that he actually did take mushrooms, but she said that it was just a placebo to get Skinner off her back. I could be wrong, but
entirely possible, actually. Yeah. But at any rate, it is this notion of the drugs can give you superpowers. The drugs work.
Yeah. So again, we've got references to the whole, I suppose, psychedelic sort of subculture within conspiracy culture, which is all very much tied in with the alien thing, with the UFO thing, and it does sort of result in essentially towards the end of this episode, everyone has something of a transcendent experience in their own different way. So Mulder has his mushroom experience. The Agent Einstein, the younger agent, has a kind of initially, I guess, a crisis of faith, which transforms into a new paradigm in which she accepts that science in a conventional sense can't necessarily explain everything. And I think the other guy, Miller and Scully, I think they, from memory, there was some kind of reflective dialogue where they're talking about the bigger picture and they're talking about the oneness of humanity and how we can't explain everything and we've just got to accept the unknown, accept the mystery, and focus on love rather than fear, and all this type of stuff, which is very much tied into, I guess, the sort of psychedelic culture of things like, DMT and psilocybin and all that kind of stuff. So everyone gets the warm fuzzies, I felt that was very, relevant. And there's also references to things like theosophy and like Madame Blavatsky. She's mentioned it a few times in this episode. So those things are linked in real, conspiracy culture. If you look at people who are into, psychedelics and, the occult and things like that, there are often references to mystery schools like the Theosophists and Blavatsky and stuff like that. So again, there are these counterpoints, like you were saying, Aaron, of the kind of the old and the new, the kind of the dialectical idea of the left-wing warm fuzzy versus the right-wing hatred. These are all coming out very much, I feel.
Well, and the whole thing kind of sets you up to think that there's going to be some kind of positive end, that the final episode is somehow going to be a good one, if you like. It's that this is somehow going to reach a resolution, but they do the exact opposite, as it actually turns out. And I think that's kind of nasty, actually, in a way. That you have, at the end of this fifth episode, you have this, like you say, warm, fuzzy feeling, and everyone's kind of realizing a bit more about themselves and a bit more about the world and the mystery of life. And then it drags you right back into the world of hard, horrible, nasty, eugenicist, elitist political conspiracy. Why they did that, I'm not really sure, but I did feel it was a bit cruel that they sold you a dummy. They said at the end of the fifth episode, oh, this looks like it's going this way, but oh, no, it isn't. It's very much going in a different way.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It's almost like it's kind of a glimmer of hope that we get in this one, because it does feel, during this sort of the ending sequence where everybody's having some kind of, transcendent view on things. are talking about, like you were saying, accepting the mystery of life and knowing yourself and being accepting and tolerant of things, and a lot of this warm fuzzy rhetoric. And then we go, straight into the next episode, which is the last one of the series. And it's we're straight back into this very, very cruel, evil, ruthless conspiracy, aren't we? So yeah, that I hadn't thought of it like that, but that is quite interesting. So I guess on that note, I will continue to move on, and we'll talk about the last episode. So where are we here? So yeah, so it's number 6. So just six episodes in the season. Number 6 is My Struggle Part 2. So, that is continuation of Part 1. We come full circle. We're back to dealing with the same kind of subject material, the same plot arc and set of concepts as we did in the first one. So this opens, the episode opens with a summary of Part 1. This time, instead of Mulder doing the monologue, it's Scully doing the monologue, and she explains sort of her life path, her career path, the kind of revelations and the journeys that she's been through in her, relationship with the X-Files, with Mulder, all the things they've experienced together, etc. And I think, the next thing that happens is that Tad O'Malley, who had previously disappeared, I think, in the first episode. If we harken back to the first episode, I think we can recall that when Mulder and Scully were pulled into the Tad O'Malley's big conspiracy theory, he was essentially, he appears to have been compromised. So, the higher-ups above him decided that he was, getting too far in. They needed to take him out. His witness turned on him and said that he was full of shit. His show was taken off the air, and he seems to disappear. Never to be heard from until the 6th episode here. And so he basically reappears on his InfoWars type show, I guess, basically telling the public that they all have a percentage. What is it? Does he say that they all have a percentage of alien DNA, or what does he say?
Yeah,
again?
he claims that everyone has a bit of alien DNA in them.
Yeah. So he claims that we've all been genetically manipulated over time, and we've all got some kind of alien DNA within us. So this is a big revelation. Scully's watching this on the internet. Next thing we see, Scully goes to try and track down Mulder to talk to him about this. She enters his apartment. It's been ransacked, and he's missing. So, they assume that he's actually being kidnapped or something like that. And we see Mulder, it cuts to shots of Mulder escaping in his car after having gone through some kind of an ordeal with somebody. So he's on his way somewhere. He's on a mission. Cut back to O'Malley's next revelation, where he has some kind of a doctor on with him, and they're revealing that this genetic manipulation is going to result in some kind of massive global contagion caused by all this genetic manipulation that is essentially going to result in, basically, I think it's immune system failure. So this is being done through the release of anthrax into the environment. So the anthrax is supposed to be some kind of a catalyst to activate this DNA, which basically destroys your immune system and makes you susceptible to any number of common diseases, colds, flus, whatever else, fevers, etc. Scully then tracks down a former agent. Not sure what her relevance is here, but she seems to be some kind of a former agent with the FBI who was previously in a similar line of work. And this agent outlines the fact that she previously was working with the famous cigarette smoking man. Now, we introduced with him, or reintroduced with him briefly in the first episode. He's always the shadowy character, who we're not really sure about. We know that he plays an important role, but we're never exactly sure, what that role is. And she outlines that in her dealings with him, the cigarette smoking man has explained the true greater conspiracy, and that's basically to depopulate the planet with this use of alien DNA and genetics, and only the chosen few, the elite, and they use that term, will have their genes strengthened, whilst the masses will succumb to disease. So basically what it is that through this genetic manipulation, some people, the chosen few, have had their genes strengthened and made resistant against this attack, whilst the masses have not. And it's revealed that, a few people, including Scully, have had that genetic manipulation done to them, so they are essentially safe. So Cuts back to Mulder. Mulder, turns out, has evaded this assassination attempt and has himself tracked down a cigarette-smoking man, who then proceeds to explain and expand on this whole conspiracy directly to Mulder. He ties it into 2012, another meme which we see come up a number of times throughout the various episodes. He says that, he makes himself out to be some kind of environmentalist, someone like a Murray Strong or a Rockefeller or something like that. Very, very reminiscent of the Samuel L. Jackson character in Kingsman, though, Tom. It reminded me of, the crazy environmentalist who's trying to wipe out the planet,
Yep.
It sees himself as benevolent and everything like that. So, he explains this whole thing to Mulder. And Mulder's, begging with him, trying to appeal to his conscience. This guy's just laughing and saying, you guys have done it to yourself. All I'm doing is speeding up a process which is already in play. We cut back to Tad O'Malley, who throws in a chemtrail reference, and I believe that's the first and the only direct chemtrail reference in the series, where Tad explains that this anthrax is being delivered through chemtrails. So I think they had to cram that one in there at the end. It basically just it all just kind of speeds up from there. So we've got this grand conspiracy all coming to a head. The clock is ticking. Panic, panic, panic. People are dropping off left, right, and center because anthrax is being injected into the environment and people are coming down with diseases. Mulder is trying to appeal to the cigarette-smoking man and get him to stop what he's doing somehow. Scully has figured out that her DNA, the alien DNA, which has been strengthened, is the thing to create a vaccine with. So she and Agent Einstein try and create a vaccine. It's all peaking to a crescendo. Society's falling apart. The big end game is all coming to fruition, and it all gets tied up with, I think it's Mulder, Scully, and I think both of the younger agents getting sick. And the last scene we see in the episode is them standing on a crowded highway as people are trying to, get out of town in typical disaster movie fashion. And one of these big triangle-shaped UFOs comes down and shines its light on them, and that's it. And so it sort of leaves it open for another season, and a bit of a cliffhanger there. But that's essentially it. Probably quite a bit to talk about. So, Aaron, what were your impressions of the last episode here?
It seemed like a return to the first episode where things get serious in terms of the conspiracy and what is the most serious thing we could talk about. Well, depopulation, killing everybody on the planet. And, they play to that idea, and they do a real good job putting all of the typical conspiracy genre information in there. And I never know how to word this stuff, but you know what I mean. They put in all the stuff that any truther or whatever has ever heard in here. And they also added in the alien thing because it's the X-Files.
Yeah. Tom?
Well, I mean, I did feel it was another one of those where the exact nature of the conspiracy was kind of redefined several times throughout the course of the episode. It was sort of, at one point it's about the chemtrails, and then it's about alien DNA, and then it's about vaccines, then it's about this, and it's about that. And by the end of it, it's like, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter how this thing has been brought about. What you've got to take away from this is that there's a conspiracy, it's a great big conspiracy, and they're going to kill everyone. Yeah. And it doesn't, the details are irrelevant. And again, it's this kind of truthiness. It's conspiracism. It doesn't matter about the specifics. Don't worry about, facts or anything like that. It's just the general idea of a big conspiracy trying to kill everyone. That's all that really matters. That's all you take away. That's all you have to believe in. You don't have to, be any more specific or careful or intelligent than that. And of course, it leaves it as a kind of, as per usual with conspiracism, it's totally hopeless. There's no real, it's only Scully and her alien DNA amplified gene vaccine, whatever the hell it is that she's creating with Einstein. That's the only hope. Everyone else is basically just screwed. They're just sat there waiting for it to happen. And so, you have that kind of pessimistic inevitabilism. Inevitabilism? That's not really a word. You know what I mean. The inevitability of the success of the conspiracy is very much something that comes through in this episode. It's very pessimistic. It's very kind of futile in that way, as to, if this did actually happen, there's not an awful lot we could do about it. And then what I can't imagine, though, is, they've basically, in this sixth episode, they've taken a disaster movie and compressed it into 40 minutes. And that's one of the reasons why the episode doesn't make a lot of sense and is a bit difficult to kind of keep up with and explain. I mean, you did a pretty good job explaining it there, but it's difficult because there's so much crammed into it. And I do wonder, where are they going to take this next? Because the whole game's blown wide open now, surely, isn't it? Either the whole of humanity gets wiped out, in which case there's not much of a TV series left, so presumably that's not going to happen. Or Scully is successful and manages to rescue at least half of humanity or something, but then everyone knows what's happened. And also, on top of that, you have this flying Toblerone appearing over the motorway at the end, in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people. So the whole UFO thing is blown wide open. That's no longer a mystery. It's now completely confirmed there are UFOs. Everyone knows it. Everyone's seen it. So it's like, where do they go from here? I really don't know what the first episode of the next season is going to look like.
Well, one thing that comes to mind just there is that when I think in the first episode, when Mulder is explaining the whole thing to Scully, his deduction of what this conspiracy actually is, he does mention this kind of Project Bluebeam scenario, whereby this elite would actually use reverse engineered alien technology to make it appear as if there was a alien invasion. So essentially, a false flag ET invasion. And this is something again which is fairly popular in the some of the fringes of conspiracy culture. And I guess that could be where it's going. That was listed as something that Mulder believed was going to happen in part 1. We come full circle to part 6, and the very last scene is a UFO appearing on a highway in front of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people. So it's kind of revelation of the method in a way. I think that the only way they could really continue on the plot in any way without being completely implausible would be to essentially play out that conspiracy, because as you say, people have seen this, it's all falling apart. You either have to kill everybody or else everyone's going to know what's going on, unless you can give them a huge distraction and blame it on aliens. So I think that could be where they're going, but again, we won't know until they decide, if they do, to do another season.
Yeah, and I wonder if they even will. If they do, they'll figure out some sort of writer's trick where they, again, will probably pander to the conspiracy crowd in making the most obvious, hugest conspiracy ever that actually happened plausibly deniable. And then that'll show, like, look, you can almost kill all the masses and get away with it and nobody even knows. And how much would the conspiracy crowd love that? So you could write that in there as your little writer's tricks. I don't know if they'll continue this or not. What do you think about that, Tom? Are they going to keep going with this, or what's the deal with all this?
I honestly don't know. But I mean, the series has been outstandingly successful. It's got huge audiences and huge responses, and everyone's reviewing it and talking about it. I can't imagine from a commercial point of view that they won't continue it. Because this was clearly like a tester. Let's roll out 6 episodes and see if the spirit is still there. See if people are still really into this, as we hope and think they are. Because the films didn't do very well. The films were kind of naff, and, they must have had that question mark hanging over them. Is this just going to bomb? But it hasn't. It's been massively successful. So I think they probably will try another series, like a full one with 10 or 12 episodes or something. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of tricks they could play. I just mean that given the trajectory of the X-Files from 93 to 2002, it was basically, at the end, you still have all the same questions. You still have all the same problems. You still have the same setup. Everyone's still in the same status of not knowing. Whereas now, it's like they've got to completely change the context within the reality of the show to accommodate for all of the stuff that they've crammed into this wildly experimental miniseries. They have, like, transformed what the show is and what it's about. It's now much more of an action show, for one thing. So the scale of the thing has become so much bigger. It's no longer just about Mulder and Scully investigating, sewer monsters in Chicago or something. I don't think they can't really go back to that, having taken such a huge step in this 6th episode. So I think they've redefined what the show is. And no matter how they then try and bring that back down to earth, some of this has got to still be there. Otherwise, the show becomes so unrealistic that I think people won't watch it anymore. It's a challenge for them, but I think they'll find a way of doing it. You're right. They'll find a writer's trick, I'm sure.
Well, I think in doing what they're doing and redefining the show with, transforming it, like you say, from something that's more akin to a sort of piece-by-piece crime scene investigation scenario to a grand global conspiracy, it's all happening right now scenario. I think part of the reason that was done was probably just a reflection in some way of conspiracy culture in general, because if we look at especially episode 1 and episode 6, it definitely echoes that panicked sentiment that we see all too often in mainstream conspiracy culture, especially with people like Alex Jones, and to a lesser degree, I suppose, people like David Icke. And what I mean by that is that it presents the conspiracy as being something that is going to happen at a specific point in time, and that everything will be revealed. Even if we die, it's all going to happen immediately. It's kind of me and you, Tom, have talked about this in a previous clandestine episode, if you recall. We were talking about the way that so much conspiratorial topics online are presented as being something that are immediate. They're scary, they're immediate. It's all going to happen tomorrow. It's all going to happen right now. It's all going to come together. Big end game scenario that's going to happen overnight. I mean, Mulder outlines this in episode 1. He talks about, first the banks are going to crash, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. So we're talking about like a total, apocalypse end time scenario happening over the course of a weekend. And so I think when we talk about the fact that the show has been transformed from something more akin to investigation with a little bit of maybe spycraft or something like that, into this big grandiose conspiracy scenario, I think probably a reflection of the target audience in a big way, and so they have to continue going with that, because the previous format I don't think would work in contemporary culture. So yeah, but
no, it probably wouldn't. No, you're right.
And they've obviously done that. I mean, sorry, Aaron?
No, I was just going to say, why don't we end up this whole conversation just with the idea that conspiracy theory is going mainstream? I definitely want to hear what Tom has to say about this.
Well, that's a good idea. What I was going to suggest actually is I'm going to turn it over to you now, Tom, and you can outline some of because we've been talking about this via email, so you can maybe outline some of the key questions in terms of, what does this mean? Conspiracy culture going mainstream. Who are the sort of target audiences, and how they're supposed to feel about this? So do you want to perhaps outline some of those questions, and then we can take it from there?
I can try. I mean, essentially, the thing that everyone has to get straight with right off the bat with this show is that it is aimed at conspiracy theorists. That is its primary target audience. That is who Chris Carter went out and researched before writing this new miniseries. So he's pretty unabashed about that. He's not denying that at all. And so what you have to come to terms with is the fact that conspiracy theory is very much now, always has been to some extent, but very much is now a market. It's not just a subculture. It's not a way of life per se. It's a market, first and foremost. It has been commodified, and not just by the likes of Alex Jones and David Icke, but now by the likes of Fox, Chris Carter, mainstream people. It has now been eaten up by mainstream culture and kind of diffused. They've sort of taken the teeth out of it by doing that, because now it's very difficult for people to have not heard of, for example, 9/11 conspiracy theories. So that's not the controversial idea that it once was. It doesn't have the same power that it once did. That's something to reflect on. And whether that's specifically deliberate or not, I don't know. But it's certainly a consequence of the mainstream eating this alternative culture, as it has and as it is continuing to do. Then there is the question of, how do conspiracy theorists respond to this? Because going back to that montage, or that very, very fast bit of dialogue where Mulder and O'Malley lay out the big conspiracy in the first episode, that little clip has gone mega viral in the last few months. And it's met with two quite distinct responses. The first response is, they're mocking us, they're taking the mick, they're mixing it all up together to make us conspiracy theorists look stupid. And the other response is, see, this is the truth. They've finally put it on TV. They're finally admitting all of it. So you've got two very distinct interpretations there that I think in some ways actually effectively sum up the whole conspiracy culture as it stands at this point in time, that it's either desperately looking for some kind of encouragement or affirmation, or it's just paranoid about everything that ever mentions conspiracy. And neither one of those is really going to take it anywhere, I don't think. And so what is this show doing? It's certainly highlighting that. Is it mocking them? To some extent. Is it affirming conspiracy? To some extent. I think it's doing several things at once. And maybe that's the important takeaway for people about this, is that there's no doubt this show is influenced by conspiracy theory and is trying to influence conspiracy culture and conspiracy theory. But it isn't just trying to do one thing, one very simplistic thing. I think it's actually trying to do several different things at once and actually trying to build a show that sustains these kinds of contradictory interpretations all at once. I think that's perhaps the best way I can find of summing up what this show is doing.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying there. And we did talk briefly, at least, about the notion of this potentially being state-sponsored in some way. Now, in my albeit brief investigations, I haven't been able to find anything to latch onto in terms of any, sort of direct links between the show's production team or the director and any other sort of third parties or government-affiliated agencies. But, what we could be talking about here is something perhaps on more of a meta level, where this is in some way a reflection of conspiracy culture, which is also intended to guide or influence conspiracy culture, as you say. And I think that, rather than simply trying to evoke two standard responses, and that you outlined there before, where people are either totally paranoid and think that this is simply disinformation designed to discredit conspiracies, or whether people think that this is a validation of conspiracy theories. I think we're probably looking at, as you say, something more nuanced and probably a whole bunch of different reactions, which just serve to, I don't know, further deepen this market, as you say, because it's not just culture anymore, not just a subculture, but it's actually a market. And so, they want to expand that and bring as many people in as possible, not only because this drives ratings and it helps them to continue what they're doing, but it also, I think, in a way serves to, without wanting to go down the road of total paranoia and thinking this is nothing but nonsense, it does kind of trivialize it in a bit, in a way. And I think, again, so as opposed to two distinct responses, I think we're probably, fairly careful in eliciting a whole bunch of different responses, which, again, serve to deepen this market. So you've got people who are perhaps on the fence in regard to conspiracy topics, looking at this stuff and being swayed into thinking, well, maybe this is some of this is real, maybe I might investigate some of it, but a lot of it seems like nonsense. Or they could simply look at it and say, well, this is all nonsense. People who are already familiar with these topics, may look at it and think, well, this is some way of validation, that it's also mocking in other ways. And so, I think, a whole bunch of different responses. But the end result is that people are watching this, people are thinking about this. There's a whole bunch of, different responses out there, which all result in more focused on conspiracy culture as entertainment. And I think that is probably the most important takeaway for me anyway, is that it further drives the idea of conspiracy theory, whether true or not, and regardless of which bits are more palatable, plausible, believable than others. The bottom line is that it further drives it into the realm of something which is confusing, something which is contradictory, something which people debate and argue about, and therefore something which amounts to not a lot more than entertainment. What did you think about it, Aaron?
Yeah, entertainment media and conspiracy culture are converging, and that much we can see. I wonder what the reasons behind that may be. I'm always trying to figure that out. I'm never quite doing it, but I'm always working out in my head, what's really going on here, and are they trying to get us to like these ideas and share these ideas? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Tom? Or that's such a wide-ranging question.
It is a wide-ranging question, and we kind of need to wrap this up. But I will say, not to reduce it to this by any means, but I will say, with the original X-Files series, they helped create this market. And with this new rebooted miniseries, and presumably if they do another one, they're very much capitalizing on it. And It's not just about that by any means. It's not just a question of, capitalism, entertainment, making money. But that is a factor here. And people shouldn't forget that. And I mean, the bigger question, what is Chris Carter? Who is Chris Carter? Why is he doing this? All things are possible, to be honest. Yeah. At this point, I wouldn't rule any of that out, because he is a very, very odd guy. Clearly quite a bright guy, quite an intelligent and, pretty well-informed guy in some respects. So he could be up to all kinds of mischief. It's certainly a tantalizing hypothesis. But it's quite late and nothing more tangible is coming to mind.
Well, we thank you so much for being here, Tom, and for your time. It's been so good. Why don't you just tell people about your website and anything else you just want to let them know about before you go?
Well, sure. I mean, if you want to read my articles on the X-Files, or if you want to read any of my other stuff, listen to my podcast, Clandestine, or the new season of the CIA in Hollywood should be coming out in the next few weeks. Maybe not, depending on when we finish recording it. But in order to check out any of that stuff or keep up with anything I'm doing, just go to my site, spyculture.com.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, Tom. It's been an interesting discussion. I've enjoyed it. I hope the audience has enjoyed it. And if people want to check out the website, it is tmpodcast.com, and you can also get the podcast on iTunes through the RSS feed. So thank you for joining us, Tom, and thank you for joining us, Aaron. And we'll be back next month with another episode. Till next time.
This podcast was recorded on the 17th of April, 2016.